Hi, everybody. So welcome to the Thrive Forum. This is actually take two. I don't think the first one works, which is very frustrating. But talking about progressive overload, its relevance, why it's important. So by the end of this, we want to sort of define it, for you to understand why it matters, and ultimately, like, show sort of practical ways I will apply it. And obviously, like what you'll have sort of assumed, which like is absolutely fair, is that the easiest, well, progressive overload is put the weight up. But actually, we can kind of do so much more with it, and we are doing some of that in the sessions in the programming. But I just want to open your eyes to kind of like why it's important, why we want to track it, very importantly, and also how like varying ways we can do it depending on competency, injuries, niggles, tiredness, whatever it is. Um, so what is progressive overload? So it's obviously it's sort of gradual increase in stress placed upon the body, and it's ultimately how you improve. It's how you're going to get better at a particular movement, whether that's strength, whether that's fitness, whether that's range of movement, if it's aerobic, flexibility. Like you need to put yourself in a state of stress that is controlled. Because without it, you don't adapt, and then you don't, nothing changes. Okay. So why is it important? Just like what we talked about, for you to adapt, for you to change, for you to get stronger, for you to kind of get the most out of the training, we need to be making sure that there is some sort of marginal progression. And I'll touch on shortly like what that can look like. But if you don't change the stimulus, then your body will just sort of default to like, or at least I find that what you're currently doing as a stressor is just what it's used to, what it's tolerant to. So not much changes as a result. So we need to sort of challenge it, and then we can kind of come up with different variations and adaptations. Your body then adapts to it, and then as a result, you progress, you grow. Um, so ultimately, yeah, muscle size and strength, endurance and resilience, fitness. But ultimately, like, which I think is the most important, is like, you put the effort, you put the time in to come here to, ultimately, like, put in the graft. But it's nice to know that you're making progress, and it's nice to know to see the progress. So whether that's on the barbell from a performance point of view or whatever exercise, but ultimately, like, to kind of see the composition change as a result. Like minimal will change if you just keep cycling the same exercise, the same reps, the same weight. So we need to change the stimulus. So common misconception that I touched on at the beginning was that, like, yeah, the sort of progressive overload is about the weight, and adding weight each week. And the reality is that is not the case. Admittedly, like, that is something that we're sort of quite hot on at the moment in the sessions, is bringing the reps down, increasing the weight. Um, but and now again in the next slide, sort of touch on, it's about just changing the emphasis of like the stress that you're experiencing. So it's not just about the load. So there are many forms. So what we've touched on, the weight changing, the reps. It says increase reps, but sometimes decrease reps. Um, or in previous programming blocks, like sort of several months ago, we were doing like 5 sets. So increasing the sets is just you're accumulating more of that weight, more of the body, the stress that the body's under. Um, but then sort of, yeah, improve control, so slower tempo. So we've been introducing some of these pause reps, but also just like, getting stronger in areas that tend to be the weakest points. So at the bottom of the reps, increasing range of movement. Another variation is just less rest. So shorten the rest, increase like the amount of work that you're trying to complete in a certain amount of time, which you would not do, FYI, with like increasing weight. That would be more relevant to kind of more of the aerobic conditioning. And then better technique. And this one's like the most important. And it's not a case of just like a PT nausing thing. It's just like to make sure that you are moving well, efficiently, you do not get injured, or at least we reduce the risk of injury. So you move more efficiently, you get more stimulus as a result. Your body builds more tolerance to kind of the stresses you put it under. How to apply it. So this bit is more on you. So we've got the app, and I'm going to create another video shortly after this, which just kind of will show you how to input the data into your app. I know some of you do it already, but ideally everybody should be doing it. Um, so, we want you to track the data that you're doing. So the sort of main lifts, the main strength lifts in the app. You will then input like what you did, what reps you did. So then the following session, you will then see what you did, and we can then advise you as far as like, okay, our advice is reps go down, so we want to sort of maybe put the weight up, or actually, you know, um, this week would prioritize like just time under tension. So you're going to go slow, keep the weight the same. If anything, maybe go a little bit lighter, but you're going to go slow. They're equal variations of progressive overload. So it isn't about killing yourself every session. Okay, it's a case of just like moving with good intent, and I'll touch on that right at the end. So common mistakes is what I just touched on, like going too hard too soon. So, if you peak and you're effectively attempting to PB every week, like your body's going to crash and burn. It just can only tolerate a certain amount of stress, and it needs time to recover and rest. So the key thing is like, yes, we want the progressive overload, but we need to be sometimes selective and say, right, well, this week maybe it isn't heavier, and maybe you increase the reps or decrease the reps, and we do make it heavier or we make it slower. And that's something that we'll discuss as we go through, but the programming will change to different variations of this progressive overload. So bear that in mind. So in summary, it's just about making small wins add up. So those wins come in varying ways. So we touched on kind of whether it's weight, load, rests, time under tension, technique. So it doesn't always mean lift heavier. It's minor improvements. So more often than not, it is just efficiency of moving. So the technique, that's the priority. So the final takeaway is it's a sort of long-term progression. So any sort of quick fix that you're promised like you're going to get abs in 6 weeks or whatever, like I can guarantee you that that's not going to last. Like for this progressive overload or anything, we were looking for like longer term sustainable progression, changing the variations and the stress, so that your body is always on its toes effectively. It's always having to adapt, and that adapt creates the progression. And then this is like why it's in bold here is, it isn't about chasing perfection. It's about intentional improvement. And that's what I mentioned earlier is like just being very, very aware of like what are you trying to achieve in this particular rep or this particular set. You know, is it we're going heavier? So then are you ready to go heavier? Is it we're actually pausing at the bottom? So we're going to change the weights to accommodate that. Is it just working on some technique? Just being really, really aware of like, right, this is progression, but it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be heavier. Okay, it's about sustainable, like longer term progression. Okay. So that summarizes kind of the key takeaways as far as like what progressive overload is. Hopefully that's helpful. I will also create a video of how to input your weights and your data in the app so and you can see the progression. Bye.